Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local Podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I am on a Podquest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a very old friend, somebody I've known for a very, very long time. Kristian, tell us all about yourself and what you do.
It's good to see you, Oscar. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the podcast here. And it's a little bit embarrassing to think how long we've known each other through the history of
There are
gaming.
people who will be listening to this who weren't born when we first met. It's a scary thing.
I'm sure there's some stories we could dive into there about the early mobile gaming days. So I'm Kristian Rivers. I'm co-founder and CEO of in-game ad platform Adinmo. Our general premise is we think that we love free-to-play gaming. We think that there's a better way to help monetize free-to-play gaming, both through putting ads in front of players, but also just showing players the right messages for them. And hopefully not interrupting their gameplay too much. I mean, that's really the core reason we exist is we want to create a better player experience first and foremost.
Absolutely, and I think that sums it all up. So basically, what I want to do is just sort of let's touch a little bit on when we started, because I want to frame this in terms of the evolution of the mobile space, because obviously we've been there, seeing that, got the t-shirts, literally in some cases. I remember that photo you showed me earlier. But the point is that back in the dawn of time, mobile was never taken seriously, was it? Mm-hmm. But there were still some players. I seem to remember iPlay being a company name back in the early dawn of time. Obviously, I think Apple has different views on what that phrase is all about nowadays. But, when you were first kind of like, look, because, I think you had an Apple background before that as well. But when we started out, there wasn't an iPhone. There were feature phones. There was these terrible people in the operators who decided what games went on or not.
Yeah.
We were trying to find ways to make content work on devices that were really quite limited in their capacity. So what was it like at that early stage, and what were the sort of primary ways we did business as games?
It's interesting. So I guess my entree into mobile gaming was 1999. Yeah, it was the company was called Digital Bridges, became iPlay.
Yes,
We were
of course,
one of the
Digital
first.
Bridges.
We were one of the first mobile games publishers, and to give context for, as you said, the folks that hadn't even been born then, we were doing games. We were doing games on WAP and SMS over basically a dial-up connection with WAP in those days. If you can imagine that. And I remember
dial-up on your phone.
Dial-up on your mobile phone, yeah. And I remember one of the first conferences I went to, early 2000, March 2020. March 2000. It was CTIA Wireless in the US, and that was a big wireless conference. But they had no idea what to do with a little games company, so we had to stand there. And I remember they stuck us in between. They stuck us in between two other stands. On one side was like a mobile operator billing company, and the other, what they did, and I still remember this, so I keep this in the back of my mind, all they sold were the big red flashing lights that go on top of antennas and buildings and whatnot. and we're trying to, I had no idea. And we're trying to say mobile gaming is going to be huge one day, right? And nobody believed us back then.
Nobody believed us.
Yeah, clearly it has been. But I guess two things that were a real interesting takeaway for me. One is Nokia. Look, Nokia Snake started the market, right? We have to give them that credit.
Absolutely.
But also, we didn't know how to make money from it. I mean, look, Nokia gave away games basically. We were still trying to figure out the business model. You didn't have downloads at that point even. So was it a subscription model? Was it just a free thing the operator gave you to use up your minutes, to use up your data once you could do GPRS? We were figuring all that out. And it's interesting. Even now, we're still trying to figure out what is the best way to charge for our games.
Exactly. And I think this is one of the things, the joys of my first job in mobile, which was 2001. And I ended up running the 3 mobile gaming platforms. So basically that was, as I endlessly go on about, we were 68% of the European market.
This is Orange that you're at, yeah?
No, this is 3. 3 was 68. Now, bear in mind, I'm talking about 2005. By the time we were that level, we think we were the highest revenue per user in the world. Now that sounds very big. Obviously, it was trivial. There was
Yeah,
nothing in it. We're talking about most mobile games that have any level of success made more money a week than we did in a year. I mean, not quite,
yeah,
but there's definite orders of magnitude going on. But what was interesting is a lot of the techniques as an operator I was using were essentially the techniques that I'm now seeing.
yeah,
Well, we've been seeing since about 2009-10, where the movement from pay up front into free to play,
yeah,
and to me, the same principles that product lifecycle pricing, seasonal
yeah,
activity, reasons to return. We didn't do membership packages, but there was that sort of thing in the sense of part of your phone bill was dedicated to content,
yeah,
and I was competing with the other heads of teams that did you spend it on music, did you spend it on games, did you spend it on movies? And it was really interesting, kind of like being in that environment where some of the money was kind of set aside for you,
yeah,
but we're still getting relatively significant revenues from people purely because of the way we were introducing content and managing it.
yeah,
Now, well, my evolution in that period was that we started bringing in advertising based products, and I think that there is a inevitable path where you have this you start with premium paid. I
yeah.
don't like the word premium. I've struggled with word premium
Yeah,
because
I wanted to, if we have time, I would love to have a
yeah,
little aside with you on terminology,
yeah,
premium, freemium,
yeah,
free to play.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think we have a standard as an industry, a standard view on all those. Sorry for that interruption, but yeah, it's an
No, because freemium and premium are terms that we've hung different hats on than
yeah.
other industries.
Or if you remember
You know,
shareware, to again kind of show
oh
some age stuff
yeah,
here, another business model.
oh yes, shareware. Just I still remember my Wolfenstein, 3.5 inch, 3.5 inch floppy, wasn't it? It
Could have been
wasn't
five
floppy;
and
it
a
was a
quarter
hard
in
case
those
stick.
days.
Well, I think I had the yeah, I forget which machine
Let's
I
not
had at
go
the
there.
time,
Let's not
but
go there.
yeah, my Apple had the 5.5, 5.25. Anyway, like you say, let's not go there.
Yeah,
I'm just feeling so old. Anyway, the point being that I think there's always an evolution in models, and there's levels of resistance and reluctance, and I think if you thought
yeah,
then take from the period we were at with that mobile era starting out, and the introduction of Apple, the introduction of a decent store that was manageable, whether it was Android or Apple.
yeah,
Don't get me wrong, I think we had some things that were good at the time, but it was still only 3 people who could access my store.
yeah,
Now anyone can access the main stores, and I think that's good. There
yeah,
are questions. Epic have raised some of those legally, but that's an ongoing conversation. European Union have raised some questions over that. We'll see. I don't think we can get into that debate.
yeah,
But I am interested to think about, because you've been involved in this industry for so long, and now you're working specifically in the kind of advertising space. How do you think that has changed? In particular, do you think that developers understand the role of advertising properly yet?
yeah. Great questions. So look, the I guess when we think about the history of mobile gaming, a few unlocks there. Apple, as you said, iPhone 2007, amazing, another unlock.
Yeah,
Free to play, and we know. I mean, look, you look at any kind of content, and really, consumers love free, right? They love the idea of free. So free to play was an evolution of what had been happening on the web, everywhere else.
yeah,
Putting ads into stuff. That was a kind of an evolutionary business model. The other evolutionary business model, of course, was in-app purchases or being able to,
mm-hmm.
what do you want to call it, DLC, whatever. Again, that model kind of existed in other places,
Yeah,
microtransactions, whatever. But that was kind of evolutionary, and I still love that. I think that's an interesting one. The revolutionary model, I believe that mobile gaming really kind of led with was rewarded. Right, we didn't
mm,
have, I don't believe, in any other kind of entertainment medium, the concept of watch another ad or do something else to get an advertiser to do something with you in return. So the consumer
yeah,
already had this idea of giving up attention in order to play a game. That was the free to play model. But to then consciously, at that point it was still, let us interrupt your game with an ad you didn't want for
yeah,
another game, right? Whereas now the player has agency, right? They're saying, yes, I do actually want to do something. I want to give up some more attention to get something because I know the value of my time versus buying those same gems and IP. So the revolutionary one was the in-app purchase. Sorry,
Yeah.
excuse me. The revolutionary one was the rewarded video. But when you think
Exactly.
about rewarded, in-app advertising, and in-app purchase, those three together is like it's like the perfect mix of business
Yeah.
models, right? There's something for everybody there. And I think the challenge now is developers are having to figure out all this stuff too. And
Mhm.
a bigger publisher, of course, has a whole monetization team that are shit hot at this, right? Don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, but apologies on
I'm
that.
sure we'll be fine.
Just
You
keep it
know,
out
we'll
if you,
let a few past.
you know that I do tend to drop a few of those. So
Yeah.
if you're a smaller developer that just wants to create a great game, right, and you have a small team doing that, monetization is also the hardest thing to do. It really is. And whether you then use a live services company, and I'm sure Oscar, you can recommend one or two on that, or if you try and do it in house yourself, that is the challenge. You have this amazing game idea that you've rolled out. How do you now actually help it, get it to
Yeah.
pay your bills?
Exactly, and I think this has been the challenge. So, as you know, I was very lucky to be the original evangelist for what eventually became Unity Ads.
Yeah.
So I got to ride that early wave where we first learned how to use those rewarded ads, particularly as when there's the penny dropped for me when I was chatting to Matt Hall at the hip what's the name of them the guys who did Crossy Roads.
Oh,
My brain is suddenly frozen.
yeah. Mine too. That's
Um,
embarrassing.
it's not Hipster Whale.
Happy Hippo.
No. Happy Hippo was are the guys who did Adventure Capitalists, who are
Oh,
also an amazing team
yeah.
who did amazing things. We were rewarded. I get to see Sam every once in a while, who from Happy Hippo, Hyper Hippo. Sorry, Hyper
Thank
Hippo.
you. Yes.
The lesson that we had when we were talking about Crossy Road, because Crossy Road was the first game that basically generated 3 million quid in 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and just from ads.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing game anyway. It just happened to take that Frogger
Yeah.
mindset and deliver an experience that was very fun and engaging and very accessible. But what was interesting is that Matt and his team had really thought about making the purpose of watching a rewarded ad functionally good.
Yeah.
And that meant that during that era, we saw a massive rise of people going, I want that. And it was this things like, I always make the joke about if somebody had let me watch an ad
Hmm.
in Dark Souls, they would have made 100 times as much money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know I'm not entirely serious, because the very fact that you have these cheat methods, which are rewarded, that is essentially kind of like a little cheat. Um, it does change the flavor and the dynamic and the game economy,
Hmm.
but it doesn't have to do that to the detriment of the experience. It's
Yeah.
kind of what I think we're saying. Yeah.
Sorry, I was taking a couple notes here because you said a couple of
Mm.
interesting things. Functionally good is a really interesting, because I would
Yeah.
argue, I love that, because I would argue most of the games today, including the ones I play and I love,
Mm.
the ad experience overall is probably functionally pretty crap. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what the definition of functionally
Absolutely.
good is. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that is one of the challenges of ad monetization, right? Well, just the key
Mm.
challenge, right? How much friction do you put in versus
Yeah.
monetization? And that's where the things that I think about as we're effectively, amongst other things, an ad monetization platform. One is player agency, right? That's the unique thing about gaming as an entertainment medium. And sorry, I'm going to take a little
Absolutely.
side here. If you think about, there are
Go.
other
Go.
entertainment
Go.
mediums that have this hybrid monetization model, right? So Disney Plus, you can get some of it for free with ads, or you can pay extra to get rid of them. Discord, you can use Discord for free now with ads, or you can buy premium stuff within it. So the idea of the player, but in a game, the player actually can choose what they're doing. And that's why rewarded is
Yeah.
so good, right? So that player agency is really interesting. And then the other one is relevance, and I think that's particularly the functionally bad thing. It's my ongoing frustration, and I'll moan about this till the world changes, which is I still, I'll play a game and it's like, here, play for 1 minute and then here's 30 seconds of unskippable ads, and I'm like, this is for a game I downloaded it a year ago. I played it for 5 minutes. It was shit. I deleted it, and I'm still getting ads for that game. So that's not
Yeah.
a good experience at
Yeah.
all for the player. So that's the things that try, and that's the things that we should be leaning into as the gaming world, right? Is the player can make
Mm,
choices, and in making those choices, they can tell us, what's interesting
mm,
to them or not, what they want, as opposed to us guessing, and
absolutely.
usually guessing wrong as an industry.
Mm. And this is an interesting one because this is where, whilst we absolutely want to maintain and sustain player privacy, the way that player privacy has been implemented has been to the detriment of the player experience. In fact, actually, you say a 30-second ad, I'd be lucky if I get an ad for 30 seconds nowadays.
Yeah,
I'm now stuck in this unskippable process where not only
yeah,
are they going to show me the 30-second ad, they're then going to make me play a playable for 30
yeah.
seconds.
You're going
They're
to click
then going to
15
make
times trying to
me,
get rid of it. Yeah,
and you're not allowed to get rid of it. And then you got to hold on the store page, well, the sort of pre-store page for another
yeah,
30 seconds. What?
yeah, yeah,
And honestly, this is so just an aside, the things we learned back in the, I don't know what your experience of this is, I'd love to know if you've seen data on it. What I found is that when we first did tests, that players responded much more positively to 20-second ads than they did 30. The reason we ended up with a 30-second ad is because the ad companies didn't want to do something that small, because it's really hard to
yeah.
communicate an entire message in 20 seconds.
Well,
And
it
yeah.
depends on the message that you're trying to communicate, and
Mm,
I think uh, that's one of the other things that I think about a lot, again, as an ad tech company, amongst other things, is the the overall global advertising business right now. Advertising globally is $1 trillion, right? Digital advertising is 700 billion. In-game
yeah.
advertising is, let's call it 70 billion, maybe, and it's very highly
Yeah.
concentrated with a few publishers. And of that 70 odd billion, almost 100% of it is just within the economy, right? It's all just
Yeah.
games advertising other games,
Yeah.
right? There's no way for non-endemic brands to come in, right? And so if you're trying to tell the story of your game through a playable ad or whatever, it does have to be 30 seconds, right? And if you want to tell it, if you want to, in the same way that if you want to, my Paramount background, if you want to kind of talk about a movie a bit, 2.5 minute, 3 minute trailer seems to be the kind of
Yeah.
perfect way to do that. But there are other ways to get your message there. There are movie posters, for example, right? Uh, and so, how do we come up with ways to not interrupt that player for 20 seconds? And even if it's not the right message for them, it wasn't quite relevant, and we can talk about how we get better at relevance. If it's not as aggravating, then that's going to be a positive for the player. And I'm going to use a term which anybody that's been in the industry in any conference, whatever, heard me say before, which is, I think in the kind of chase for monetization, and that's our jobs, right? Our jobs are to make money for our companies.
Yeah.
But in that search for extracting every bit of monetization, and there's so much optimization we can do, how much friction do you put in? We have optimized almost all of the joy out of the gameplay experience. And that's we've forgotten that the player is why we're doing this, right? And they hate
Exactly.
this, right? They put up with
Yeah.
it, but they certainly don't enjoy it, as you just described.
No, and I honestly think we've actually shrunk the pool of players. I don't have any evidence to prove this. It's just my instinct, and it was really shown when a long time ago. Now I know when Pokemon Go launched, where it was like bigger than the rest of the App Store at the time,
Yeah,
which to me says the pool that we're playing in is a slice of the cake. It's not the whole potential cake if our
yeah,
experiences were better,
yeah.
if that makes sense. And I think as we've shrunk our audience targeting,
Yeah,
the enjoyable element of it, because of all these reasons we've said, and because of the data protection implementation choices that certain companies have made,
yeah,
I'm of the opinion that that's kind of been a self-negative driving cycle. In fact, most of the time when I'm trying to help people understand how to do monetization, 99% of the fight is to remind them we should be dealing with player value,
yeah,
not
yes,
how much money we can get.
yeah,
Because if we the money we get comes out of player value, it
yeah,
doesn't come out because we'd like it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And the way you get that player value is completely agree. The way you get that player value is being aligned with the player, right? So you have to,
yeah,
everything you do has to be through that lens of, is this going to be better for the player experience, or is it going to be worse, right? And inevitably, if you're doing something, and sometimes letting them play a game for a period of time in return for watching an ad, that is better for the player experience, right?
yeah,
But if you're doing it too often, if you're just overloading them with ads, then that kind of breaks that. So that's the one part of it that we think about. I guess the other one is, so we within the games industry, we think about ad load in general, right? And specifically,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna say for traditional, what I would call traditional ad companies. So the Iron Sources, AppLovins, everywhere in between that are usually interstitial ads, rewarded videos, et cetera. Great formats. But it's how many of those can we shove in front of the player within a particular point of time. Now, I'm going to try not to get too salesy here, guys, because this is really not a sales conversation. But what I love about the in-game ad stuff that we do, and I'm sure there's other ways,
Yeah.
right? And we have one way, but there are other ways of doing this as well. And arguably, actually, and I'm going to say banner ads, which I don't think anybody in the history of the world has ever clicked on a banner ad in a game on purpose, but they do match the one thing I'm going to say here, which is
Yeah.
our goal is not to interrupt that game experience, right? We want the player, with our in-game ads, we want the player to spend more time in the game because that gives us more opportunities to show them an ad. That helps the developer gets that. So if we can get that alignment, whatever that format is, whatever that monetization method is, if it's aligned with the player, the developer, and whatever platforms other stakeholders are there, then you've done the right thing, right? And I think we're getting some misalignments, back to monetization versus joy.
Yeah, and I suspect this comes down to a kind of marketing kind of principle where back in the era where data was manageable in the
Yeah,
sense of like targeting was more effective than it
yeah,
currently is. Again, not going to labor that point. Um, we were able to what we saw is direct response ads. So I put
yeah,
a message out, you click on it, I install a game.
yeah,
That was a magically instant
yeah,
experience, and it was good for a player because I like the look of that game. I'll give it a go. There's no frustration or no friction to do so because there's no price for me to give that game a try. Now that was a peak moment of communication to delivery, completely shrinking the
yeah,
friction. But now I would argue that we're in a kind of a different situation. What that what that has what that the downside of having that
yeah,
completely frictionless thing is that brand building broke.
yeah,
So we stopped doing what traditional advertising always did because the aim of original aim of advertising was not you would click this link and you would then it was
yeah,
that we'd build up a series of messages that
yeah,
would allow you to associate that shape, that brand
yeah,
with these values.
yeah,
And the downside arguing why I think maybe we're in such a because the ground has shifted and it should have done because we
yeah.
weren't treating the data as an industry as cleanly as maybe we should have done, and there were some bad actors who were doing irresponsible things, but because that ground has shifted, we have to adapt. Now
Yeah.
I would argue that's where the brand value becomes important again. But I think we're seeing instead of focusing on the brand value part of it, we're seeing
Yeah.
a lot of teams focusing on how to hold your eyes on a thing that's not necessarily enjoyable. If
You've,
that
you've,
makes
you've
sense.
you've touched on two very related and very important things. So one is addressability, right?
Yeah,
And all, IDFA apocalypse, whatever you want to call all this kind of stuff. That all of the in-game advertising today, all the video ads targeting other games, right? You're trying to get installs, right? All of that has been based on this kind of deterministic information, right? And so I'm
yes,
so glad that's going away. I have said from day one of Adinmo, we love privacy, and that's another whole other thing. There's other developers and publishers and monetization companies starting to think about this as well. I probably have been all along.
yeah,
Our view is privacy isn't like something you have to work around. The idea that your device ID has
no,
gone away, that's a feature, right? And if you think of it
yeah,
that way, but then you have to figure out how do you get the right messages. Now, I'll be honest. Here's where my lack of knowledge comes in, because I don't think about how to get more game installs. That's just not what we want to get the brands in. So I don't
yeah,
know what that means. If you're a user acquisition manager, I really don't have good answers for you. Not because they're not out there, because I know nothing about that.
yeah. No,
But
no,
we
it's a
want to get
different skill
brands.
set.
Yeah, and so we want to
Yeah,
get the brands in. And as you said before, if a brand, they're really thinking about reach and that frequency of the messaging, which is very different from a UA campaign, which is what is our how do we optimize for that CTR, for that CPI, whatever. And the brands haven't been able to come in. They can't, and they want to focus on all throughout the brand funnel, from top of funnel, awareness, recall, down to consideration, intent. And that's why I think this other types of formats are really interesting. But then the other side of this is, if that privacy is there, how do we make sure that we're getting that right message to the player? And I'll come back to agency, right? Player
Yeah.
agency. And that's the thing that is amazing, because what we do today is kind of understanding what that player is engaging with, right? Because now we have. In fact, let me take a little side. Here's an interesting one. TikTok. I love TikTok, and I don't know how much you use TikTok, but you install TikTok.
Not as much as I used to. I go in and out with it.
You're not you and I are both not the target demographic, right?
Yeah.
TikTok skews very young and female, but TikTok is
Yeah.
amazing, right? You install the app, and it doesn't ask you anything other than your date of birth, which everybody lies about, right? And within a very short period of time, and I'm not doing anything, I haven't told it anything about me, it's showing me cat videos and barbecue tips and tricks, right? It's figured me out. And
Yeah.
that's amazing because of my interactions with the videos. Am I watching or skipping them? And the categorization of them behind them. And that's another part of what TikTok are doing. They start off as almost all ad supported, right? And in the last quarter, about 38% of their revenue was actually in-app purchases as well. So they've been doing this kind of hybrid monetization model. So how do we get those signals from a player that isn't just a click? Because I think we're starting to realize a click is just a bad thing. It's driving the user out of that
Yeah.
experience. So, and they're doing all these things that we should be learning from, right? And that's the really interesting thing is that kind of unconscious way that the player tells us. And then if we move forward, the ultimate for me is when it becomes conscious for the player but fun, right? And I think personalization is the ultimate form of relevance, and that's again why gaming is so awesome, right? The concept of personalization, putting different colors and logos on your football player, on your race car, whatever, that's existed forever, right? So now if
Yep.
we give that player the ability to choose Nike, Adidas, whatever, the player loves that, right? We love that because we're getting really interesting information. And Nike and Adidas love that because they know the player has either chosen them for that or not chosen them, but maybe they can convince them to choose otherwise. And
Yep.
that's kind of where the future gets really exciting. And all of that is, again, none of that is based around interrupting the player, interrupting the game, right? It's how do we keep them in that game? And sometimes that means allowing the player to spend money in the game as well. I suppose
Yeah.
that's the other
And I
side of it
think
that
this
you talk
is.
about.
Yeah, no, I think there's, again, a lot of the stuff, I think for true hybrid monetization, which is the term that people have been using to try to
Yeah,
describe this kind of process, I think one of the kind of interesting things about this is understanding the what each part of that puzzle says about
yeah,
the game, its brand, its expectation. So for me, a paying up front, which I prefer to say rather than premium,
yeah,
I'm trained marketeer. Premium has a specific meaning. Kotler said it was
yeah.
high price, high quality. That's what premium actually
Uh-huh.
means. That's the functional definition of it. So whenever someone says premium for pay up front, my hackles go up. But anyway, the point being is that if I know the function of paying up front and what it says about the game, typically it's about on games for which there is a start, middle, and end.
Yeah,
It's a good thing for those games. It's probably less good for a game that's got an endless ongoing experience, because
yeah,
if you've got an endless ongoing experience, we need to be able to maintain that endless ongoing
yeah,
experience. And if we can't, guess what? Your player
yeah.
experience is going to be worse.
There,
So knowing these things and knowing how to slice it and realizing that there's a reason why being able to offer somebody the chance to watch an ad to taste the flavor of this thing that they may want to buy later is also as important as the fact that it unlocks a revenue contribution that the players
yeah.
know they're giving by watching an ad to the success of the game. I think
I want to come back to some
we should
terminology
appreciate that.
here. It's you mentioned because you talked about functionally good earlier, premium. So
Yeah.
by the way, I hate the terminology, the term hybrid monetization. I hate it, but
Oh,
I
I
recognize
like it.
I haven't come up with a better one, and I recognize that the
Yeah, yeah,
industry has settled on that. So look, I've got to change. I'm going to
yeah,
recognize that is the right term. So I'm
yeah,
embracing it. Premium is interesting because I would disagree with you that I agree it involves high quality. I don't think it involves
yeah,
high price. I think if you look at look at so I just downloaded the new Supercell game, right? Was it
yeah,
oh God, Brawl Squad, right? Brawl Squad.
yeah.
Um, that's a premium game. That's a premium experience, right? It's a lovely game. But I didn't pay anything for it. So I think you can have premium experiences without a premium pricing.
Well, that's the again the reason why I use that phraseology is because it was a specific definition
As opposed to
that has
paying to
been
download. Yeah. for
Yeah,
free to
yeah.
download.
Well, it's because the origin of that term
Yeah,
in pricing strategy
yeah,
comes from this writer called Kotler. At least that's my
yeah,
exposure to it.
yeah,
So when somebody goes from the academic term and repurposes it,
yeah,
so yes, this is premium in the there is no such thing as right language. It's
yeah,
absolutely everyone can call it what they like. I'm just expressing my kind of frustration as somebody
yeah.
who's trained in pricing strategy
I get it. I get it. And if we think
to
about that hybrid,
go, hey,
yeah.
what's that?
So coming back
Yeah,
to the one
because
that the term I don't like,
yeah,
the model I love, which
yeah,
is the hybrid monetization. That's the other
yeah,
one that I think we should talk
yeah,
about because everybody's trying to figure that out, right? Like I said, whether it's a Netflix, whether it's a TikTok, whether it's
yeah,
gaming. I was at you were at there as well. I think in fact, this is embarrassing. This was a panel that you moderated at PGC
probably.
San Francisco earlier this year.
Yeah, yeah,
You had Anton from Say Games, and you had Harry Lang from Quali on stage,
yep,
and
yep.
they both
They were
said,
great. They were
yeah,
great.
and they both
Yeah,
said basically the same thing, which is, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but look, right now we know that the casual, hybrid casual, hyper casual, what do you call it, that world of gaming right now, somewhere between 0% and 5% of ever players ever spend any money in the game. And both of them said
yeah,
that this is Quali and Say Games that they want to shift the needle on the percentage of players that spend something in a game to 30 to 50% of their players. That's a huge shift, right? And
huge
but you
shift.
have
Yeah,
to, one, because if your revenue model is based completely on the game install business, and
yeah,
all the issues that are happening there, then there's challenges there. And if you can't embrace getting brands in whatever way that is, working with an Adinmo, working with something else, working directly with brands,
yeah,
then you need to, where your growth is going to come from is by getting those players to spend money as opposed to trying to get them to spend more time or whatever. So that's awesome. And so the other side of this is how do we get players to, in a fun way, in a joyful way, in a non-interruptive way, and in an intuitive way, get them to do that. And that's an interesting challenge. And that's back to, you talked about the meaning of advertising. And this is the other thing I love about what we do within in-game is the meaning of advertising really is right message, right person, right time. Okay, and
yeah.
that's now
Absolutely.
that in the gaming world, we always think of that message as a paid CPM ad, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, right? What if cross promo is something
Well,
that
I don't think it's a paid CPM ad. I think that
hmm,
in games we've become so focused on the direct to consumer that we're actually only interested in CPI. Most of those platforms are
yeah,
only really paying out on CPI. They're not. So for those who
yeah,
don't know, CPI cost per install or cost per acquisition, depending on your language. CPM is cost per meal, so cost per thousands, and that's an eyeball. How many eyes have seen it? Now that's the traditional method. So when you see things like eCPM, so estimated CPM, that is it's not a trick, but it's a kind of method used by
yeah,
advertising companies on direct response ads to say this is the effective revenue you're getting based on the effectiveness of the ad. So you're getting the
yeah,
effective eyeballed value, but you're actually being paid based on the installs you're
yeah,
generating.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely, you've nailed it. And so we think about giving that right message, and I'm going to use a CPM model because it's easier for me. But you're right;
Yeah, no, it makes more
it's
sense
not
for a
always
general
that.
principle to
Um,
compare
Cross
apples and
promo is
oranges.
something that anybody in the games monetization, user acquisition business understands, right? But they generally treat cross promo as we'll shove we'll shove an ad in for one of our other games if we just don't have any fill, right? But the reality is, if your install cost, if your CPI is, I don't know, I'm gonna make up a number here, say it's $3.50, there's oftentimes you don't want to show ads to a player at a $5, $10 CPM, and you're gonna get 1/1000th of that. You should be showing them ads for your next game. They're gonna leave anyways, right? And we're all pretty good at churn prediction. Next one I would say is, and again, I don't think the industry has done this as well as we can. And this is, that's awesome that we've got a lot of upside. Is now if we can predict, if we know based on previous cohorts, whatever, that a player is ready to buy the BFG 9000 gun, right? Then, and because the big boss level is coming up, and they're probably going to die if they don't have it. Let's show them ads for that, right? Instead of showing them again that $5 CPM ad, let's get $10 out of them as an in-app purchase. And And I think it's very heavy-handed right now. The way it happens today is, I've got a few games I play on my phone, and as soon as I launch it, there's immediately an offer that comes up. Buy some gems,
Yeah.
buy whatever. Today only, marked down from $40 to $5.99. I get the same offer tomorrow. It's very heavy-handed, but
Yeah.
that is the first step of let's start offering these kind of in-app purchase or in-app spend conversations. And whether that's battle passes, other things, we're getting better as an industry at that. And that's, how do we predict that? How do we get that message to that player?
But this is where I think we get to really, from a marketing, so turning on its head,
Yeah.
is from a marketing point of view. This is where integrated marketing really
Yes.
stands out.
Yeah.
So, and this is to me the opposite, the counter part to the integrate. So we're thinking about it from the point of view of how we make money in the game as the game publisher, essentially. But the advertiser has a different function, and obviously, when we are a game, we are both. We are both the advertiser of our own game, but the beneficiary of the adverts in our game. Completely unique. No other industry can possibly do this because user agency. But the reason why I think it's fascinating is because when you're looking at like Supercell, their recent launch, what was it called? The game that just launched yesterday at the time of recording. They did
Squad
an
Busters.
amazing
Sorry, that's
job.
what I was just saying. I was playing
Squad Busters
earlier.
Yes.
Thank you.
Squad Busters, yeah. Squad Busters, they were absolutely integrating all of their marketing, saying, if we get this many pre-sign-ups, everybody gets stuff in every game.
Yeah.
That's incredibly clever.
Yeah.
If you think about it, that's proper cross promotion.
Yeah.
And realizing the what that's, it's not in itself, sure, that's a thing, but think about what it says about how, as an advertiser of games, that we actually have all of our existing material, all of our existing audiences and communities, and we have the way that we deliver the adverts in the game to deliver rewards, which is a sales process. If you think about it, if I am selling you and watching an ad in order for me as a game to get revenue, but you're going to get this, that's really interesting. And if those things are themselves effectively tastes like trials of other things you might want to buy, as long as it is clear value, I think we've got an incredibly rich and proper, this is where I'm coming from, proper hybrid monetization, is realizing the joint dots between marketing the game, understanding the value of the game, understanding the rich depth player economy, as well as the monetization that arises from a rich deep player economy.
Yeah. Well, you think about what does a player, we talked about player value earlier, and you think about how does a player value their experience, and then where we are in general in the monetization industry, I would argue, is step one is we're putting some friction in front of the player, and the player might spend $1.99 to remove ads, right? So that's kind of it's getting rid of the friction. So step one is a friction-based one. I guess step two, and there's probably a bit more granularity to this, and I'm thinking out loud here on a Friday after partway into the beer here. Step two is you think about what players might want to do. It's fitting in, right? So you're in your squad, you're in your clan, whatever, and they all have certain things. So you'll buy things to fit in, and that's just kind of natural as a human being. And then step three is standing out, right? And I think Counter-Strike, for example, has been really good at it. Like, and you said kind of those custom things. It's the fear of missing out, premiumness. That's the the
true
real
premiumness. Genuinely, it's got a price. I'm happy that it's got a price. The price says something about its quality.
Perceived quality, oftentimes, but
perceived quality.
And that's where, as a gaming industry, again, something that we can do that's really cool. And it comes back to, I keep coming back to, agency, personalization, relevance. All of that is the really cool things that we do as an industry. And I don't see as much of it as I would like. I think still, as I said, all the games I play, the games I love, are oftentimes a bit too high ad load friction, and that's where we have to think about other ways. And I guess one other way I'll throw out here, just knowing your background, uh, on this, Oscar. So, Oscar, and
Uh
you have
oh. You know
you and
me
I have
too
worked,
well. Uh
yeah,
oh.
you and I have worked together over the years. You actually did some consulting for Adinmo, and I thank you for that. You also are doing some work with an audio based company, and I don't know if you want to say the name or not, but
Yeah, yeah. So I'm an advisor for Audio Mob. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so Audio Mob, Audio, Adamo now has an audio format as well.
Yeah,
That's kind of interesting because back to are we interrupting the experience or not?
yeah,
The idea is there are some games that I think Adamo types of ads where we're putting our basic kind of billboards right now in the game. There are certain types of games that just don't work, and I'm surprised at how many. When I started Adamo, I thought it would just be sports games, real world, and I'm amazed at all the different places developers are doing this. But there's just some the art style, whatever,
yeah,
doesn't make sense. Audio is a different way to kind of come into the game experience a bit, get
yeah,
the player attention, but not interrupting the game experience, and ideally even being
yeah.
beneficial to it. And there's some interesting things happening there with rewarded as well. I think all of us as the in-game space, Adamo, all of our competitors are starting to think about rewarded as well. So how do we get that
Mm.
rewarded mechanism, or what are we
And
trying to reward?
I think that's key. I mean, what I find fascinating about that whole space, particularly
Yeah,
the audio space, the reason why I'm interested in that is the way that radio operates.
yeah,
Because and now I still listen to audio things all of the time. I'm
yeah,
a pod. I sleep. I can only sleep if I listen to a podcast. Basically,
yeah,
I like podcasts. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought I like podcasts? But the thing about the podcast is, if it's done, yes, it's nice seeing people's faces sometimes, but I really like having it going on in the background while I'm doing the other things I've got to do in my life.
yeah, yeah,
And if that other thing happens to be a game, I don't have a problem with
yeah,
the with an audio ad going off at the same time. And I think particularly where there's a reward associated with it, because it takes the
yeah,
sting out of the interruption. But the point is, it doesn't interrupt my play,
yeah, yeah,
and I think
yeah.
that's magical.
Podcasts.
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan. So look, I'm born and raised in Texas. You don't hear it in my accent, but we all know I'm a Texan at heart. And
yeah,
I grew up, as a Texan, it is my God-given right to be able to own and drive a pickup anytime I want, right? And
absolutely.
it took me living overseas. I moved overseas in my early 20s. It took me kind of moving overseas for a while to actually realize the joy of public transport, right? Having basically a train or a bus, having somebody else drive for you means you can listen to a
Yeah,
podcast while you're doing
yeah.
emails, while you're playing a game. It is a great experience to be able to have that ability to be
Only
able
you would come up with a truck based analogy for audio. I love it.
the rewarded
Yeah,
one is kind of interesting. If we think about that right now, where are we at with rewarded? So let's kind of dive into that
yeah,
one a bit. The whole rewarded video, rewarded audio, uh, all of it is really about getting the player to spend more time in the game. That's reward generally,
yes,
and it might be some gems or something, but that is basically to get them to spend more time because they can spend
yeah,
those gems to do something.
yeah.
But can we reward them to do something else? So I come at it from the brand perspective,
Mm,
which is
interesting.
our
Yeah,
goal is to get the player to give attention to that brand, engage with it in some shape or form, to start to have an affinity for it, to like it.
mhm,
So if
yeah.
we can start incentivizing those sorts of behaviors as opposed to just time, which is where we're at right now, that gets really interesting, doesn't it?
Mm. It does. I mean, this is the difficulty we have with the current. I think because we've had so many bad actors, because we've had people do it in an inauthentic way,
Yeah,
we've created a level of resistance,
yeah,
understandably, with some players. And I think, in particular, in PC, absolutely in console,
yeah,
but then there's a whole other bunch of issues with trying to do interesting things with advertising in console. But I think the crux is that if you look at the way the kind of the YouTuber scene has worked, you can tell the difference between the bang you over the head kind of advertisers. I'm
yeah,
not going to say Raid Shadow Legends, honestly, versus
yeah,
those that have built a relationship with the content creators.
yeah, yeah,
And I think what I take from what you're saying is, wouldn't it be interesting if we can create a better relationship? And let's face it, there is a reason why a thing is called a soap opera,
yeah,
because they were sponsored by the soap powder companies
Yep.
in order to create this sense of ongoing
Yeah.
connection with
Yeah.
those brands. And yes, we've evolved. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily advocating total commercializing everything. I want to play a game because I want to play a
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
But as a player, if a if somebody is effectively sponsoring my experience, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to this. So back in the early days, and this is the reason why I found advertising so interesting, was I'm talking about 2005, maybe
Yeah.
maybe 4 or 5. I did the first mobile product on 3 that was advertising funded. So that was the movie trailer. So we were
Oh
charging
yeah.
50p a view to watch a movie trailer, and people were doing it in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Great.
Wow.
But then I converted it from being 50p a view to free. And 118 paid for it. This is
Yeah.
for those of you in the UK, you may know what it is, but it's a number you phone up to get direct inquiries, basically. So the net result of that was that we had a 35-fold increase in usage. So
Wow. Yeah.
people were already watching tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of videos. Now we had 35 times that
Yeah.
number.
Everybody loves free, right?
And I got more money from the advertiser who paid for it,
Yeah.
and they got I think it was a 4% increase in total call volumes to their platform, which was worth way more
Yeah.
to them than anything they'd spent on us. Now they couldn't carry it on because there's a weird thing about R&D budgets versus formal
Yeah.
budgets, but let's not worry about that. The point was, the lesson we learned from that is how many more people could actually enjoy that content.
And if we could, sorry, I think as well that kind of is a great segue for me to kind of come back to how do we get the brands in. If we could grow this in-game advertising business from just like I said, just back to the games advertising other games, how do we
Yeah.
get brands in? And especially everything is performance driven. Watch this video, click here. And there's so many things that don't make sense as a performance. The usual examples I give is, Coca-Cola can't sell a can of Coke with a click through, right? There's just no point to a click through. Ford aren't going to sell a Mustang or an F-150 pickup truck with a click through, right? And I
Stick with
worked for
pickups.
Paramount. Yeah, I worked for Paramount Pictures for a number of years.
Yeah.
Same thing. You don't watch a video, watch a trailer, and then click and go buy tickets, right? That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to drive
No.
excitement, interest, affinity, all those sorts of
Yeah.
things. And these clickable interstitial ads don't do that. And that's why the business, the overall gaming monetization business is huge. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, but it could be bigger, right? If we could figure
Yeah.
out a way to let brands come into space authentically, and sponsorship is one authentic way to do that, and to allow consumers to spend their money in the game again authentically, not because it's friction, not because it's getting rid of ads or getting rid of something or keeping them from grinding. It's because they want to, right? Unless they want to grind,
Yeah.
and some players are
Exactly.
grinders.
No, but I think your point there is absolutely spot on. I think the whole question about that pathway to connection, that sense of the example I'm going to give, right? So we talked about this. We two have talked about this a lot, which is that actually the good brands in your game add a sense of increased perceived
Yeah,
value if it's done well. And I seem to remember that, particularly with the in-world stuff, I forgot, was it Splinter Cell? But one of them had effectively, drinks machines inside the game. It was a
yeah,
company called Marvelous or something, which our friend Barn Cleve was involved with. It got sold to Microsoft, but
okay,
never worked at the time.
yeah,
So this was digital in-game advertising in the very, very early days.
yeah,
So the pizza boxes
yeah,
and the drinks machines were all branded. It wasn't. I
yeah.
don't think it was Red Bull, but it was. It was. Oh no, I
Pepsi
think
were
it
in,
might
there
have.
was Obama campaigns. I think this like
Yeah,
massive IJ worldwide.
Massive.
Yeah,
That's the company. Sorry, Massive. Yeah,
yeah, they got bought by
and
Microsoft. Yeah,
the thing, as I recall, the reason why that didn't work is once you'd had the pizza box as Papa John's, why would Domino's want to replace it?
yeah. I think there's a lot of reasons. I spoke to some of those founders because when I started Adinmo, I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't, why did it not work the first time? Um,
yeah,
I come back to it. probably didn't work for a few reasons. One,
Mm.
first and foremost, this was on primarily on console games. My co-founder,
Yeah.
Mike Panoff, he worked
Mm.
with Massive and put it into, I think it was
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2. And the problem is in those days, because it was on a console, it was baked. The advertisement was baked into the game. There was
Baked
no
in.
kind of
Yeah.
response back. Internet penetration on consoles was really low. There was no programmatic. You couldn't change it, right?
Yeah.
And there was no addressability. You couldn't say you should get Domino's because there's one right around the corner from you. I should get
Order now.
yeah, exactly. I should get something else because I hate Domino's. I prefer whatever. I'm making this stuff up. So that's the
Yeah.
other. That's part of it. And then also premium. And I think this is all happening again right now. Activision, etc. Are talking about EA. I should say are talking about bringing ads back into games, especially into, as you said, premium, or if we want to call it pay up front games. Let's call it that in deference to you, Oscar. I
Oh,
think that's
thank
a
you.
shit. Again, I think that's a shit experience for the player. I've paid
Yeah.
$70 for this game, and now you're going to try and show me a bunch of ads too. No, that's not the right thing
Yeah.
to
I mean,
do.
$70 is a big amount of money in an economic crisis.
Yeah,
I mean, again, it feels like perpetual economic crisis, but let's not go there. But the point though is, I think that, which is the in the early days, the experience. And by the way, if anyone thinks that console companies don't think about it, when I was at PlayStation, we were talking about digital and game advertising all the time. It never went
yeah,
anywhere for all these reasons you're describing. But the idea that it's never going to happen is wrong. It's
yeah,
just it needs to happen in a way which is works for the player, because
yeah,
inauthenticity kills. Advertising only works if it feels good, if it
yeah,
has a positive response.
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, maybe this is why we need to think about innovation. Anyway, we haven't got a huge amount of time left, so I want to just sort of, we talked a lot about the state of the market and the
Yeah.
state of what's right and wrong about advertising, which is great. But for a team that's trying to work with advertising in a smart, sensible way, what do you think are the three things that you would get them to consider? Should they, how should they engage with an advertising company?
So first and foremost, it depends on your team size, right? So let's assume that we're talking about a smaller company. If you are, look, if you're a team at Zynga, for example, or I'm going to use Outfit Seven. So Outfit Seven,
Yeah,
actually, with Talking Tom, right? They're doing their own brand integrations. They have a large team of salespeople that can go, and,
yeah,
and they have a huge game with huge games with lots of reach, and they're going and doing those integrations directly. I think MiniClip, others are doing that as well. So that's great. If you've got that capability, that's awesome. There's still some challenges there. There's reasons that I would say you should work with an Adinmo or otherwise, on measurement, et cetera. But the reality is, you can do a lot of this, or arguably enough to make money for now. If you're smaller, though, you're going to have to find, I come back to you, find the right partners. In the same way,
yeah,
and this is what's really cool, and I'm going to come back to my age. The democratization of monetization is really interesting to me. When back before Google AdSense was released, if you had a website, you had no way to really monetize it. And if you were a small ad, if you were Bob's Plumbing in Austin, Texas, you had no way to really advertise on the internet. Google AdSense came out, a little bit of JavaScript, plug it into a website you go to. All of a sudden, as Bob's Plumbing, you could go and advertise on the web. As Kristen's website, I could start making money from ads, and it just became something that anybody could do. Now, going forward, we've got you've got all the different plugins for ad monetization that you can do today. 20 different SDKs that you can put in. Too many, probably. So the next step then is figuring out who else are you going to work with in that space, and what is your game type? Is it one? There are times where it's just pure sponsorship, right? Let's go get one brand in, and that's a consultant or somebody like that that's going to do that for you. That may make sense in certain instances.
mm.
I would, of course, argue for an Adamo style, because one of the things I do like is the programmatic. So, if you could do sponsorship
We should
where,
quickly explain what programmatic is and why that's
oh,
different from waterfall, because people might not know that.
yeah, fair enough. Do you want to do that, Oscar, or do you want me to?
Well, you do it because you're doing you're espousing programmatic, and I always
Yeah.
struggle to kind of explain it well.
Well, I'll give it the simple way, which is right message, right person, right time. So
Yeah,
instead of let's use a takeover model where a website is going to be, our game is going to be sponsored by Nike for the next 6 months, right? And it's going to be in there. It's going to be across everything that you see in there. And it doesn't matter. I could be playing this particular game that I love, and maybe I hate Nike, right? I hate it with a passion. I really prefer Puma, whatever. So that's meaningless to me. That was wasted money from the advertiser's perspective.
Absolutely.
So programmatic, amongst other things, means be able to target the right people, right? Getting your message in front of the right people that are more valuable to you in whatever way. And it might be because they have an affinity for you, or because you think you can convert them. And that's really what our whole app install business is converting them to
Yeah.
players of your game. So what if, kind of looking forward, and I'm really curious your thoughts about the future of everything that we're doing in gaming. I do like the idea of sponsorship, but what if we could do that programmatically, where I'm playing a football game against you, Oscar, and my players, when I'm playing, they have the jerseys and the brands on them that I've chosen. Yours have the ones that you've chosen, but the football screen around us, so the stadium around us, it may be that I'm living in the US, so I'm seeing advertisements for Chevrolet. You're living in the UK, you're seeing advertisements for Vauxhall, right? And that,
Yeah,
that makes sense,
absolutely.
right? So that's where the programmatic side of sponsorship kind of comes in. So it's not just the stadium's plastered with it; the individual gets the message for them. So that's kind of interesting
I
to me.
think
So,
that's
yeah, go
really
ahead.
smart, and I've always, like you say, understanding what works to create an authentic message. So one of the
Yeah,
interesting things about football shirt branding is the company. Like when I was at Three, we sponsored a bunch of football teams, and we also had essentially got the rights to the Premier League.
yeah.
So this was an absolute. We are going to own football in mobile devices, and we spent a fortune on that,
I remember those days. Yes.
millions, utter millions. And I think I'm right in Andrew Stalber, who was one of the folks who ended up doing marketing at Rovio and Best Fiends. A lovely, fantastic guy. He was one of the people who was involved in doing that. Happened to also do a lot of the games contracts, so may have done some work with you when you
Very,
were
very
Digital
little,
Bridges, but
very
that's
quick
another
aside, and
subject.
I am interrupting you, Oscar,
Yeah,
but there is a touch point here because I also worked at Player
yeah.
X, our
Oh
friends
yes, of course,
Tony and
yes, yes,
Ari,
yes, yeah,
and in a very roundabout way, we wound up having the EPL rights for mobile for China in the days that I was living
yeah.
in China. Yeah, I remember
Nice.
those days very well.
Well, also, I think that it came through Player X. So the first Rovio game was a thing called Darkest Fear.
Yeah,
That was the first Rovio branded game, and I think it
yeah,
was the first operator to put that live. And I think it was through you guys when you were at Player X. May have been slightly before you, but it was
yeah,
that sort of era. Anyway,
yeah.
we're getting distracted. The point
Very
being
much aside.
that
Yeah,
understanding the I'm kind of losing track of where I was going now. But understanding the kind of the momentum
mhm,
of the dynamic between the player of the football match
yeah,
and the company and that the organization owned football, there is a synergy of these messages that are going on, but that's different from the screens around the side of the match that are
yeah,
not about the affinity of the player and the company, and they are, I would argue, fair game, and in fact they are better if they make sense to me, if I care about them. And I think that's the thing, is that affinity is a factor. The right player, right time, so
yeah,
right person, right time, right message is also a factor. And these are two almost competing factors. And I think
yeah,
as we move forward, we get more and more interest in the blurring of the lines, because I think streaming on mobile is going to explode
yeah,
now that Twitch and OBS and various others are now native to the devices we have in our pockets. That connection between the most social device we have, and it's the platform we're playing games on the most, and it's also that device that could naturally do all of this stuff in one go. So I think that we're going to see a blur of the lines between what is that affinity. Is it with a streamer? Is it with a
yeah,
brand? Is
yeah.
it with a game? And I think that's when things get really interesting.
So I'll bring it back because I sidetracked myself. You asked where we're going. I sidetracked myself from the question you asked earlier, which is
Yeah,
hints and tips for game developers. And
yeah,
so very much with what you're saying, I guess my summary and also vision's one word. My dream. I have a dream,
dream.
which is
Yeah,
yeah. I would love. I think there needs to be better alignment in the games industry for this to work for everybody, for the player, for the developer, for other stakeholders. We need better alignment between the game designer, the producer, and the monetization manager, right? And I think right now there's a lot of tension between monetization and game design, and it's gotten better over the years, but that is still a fundamental tension. And what we see with Adamo style integrations is we're often kind of added in after the game's already been released, right? And it works, it looks good. Uh, but if we could, if game designers could embrace how how Adamo style ads, for example, are unique and work for them earlier on in the game design phase, right? That it creates a much better
Absolutely.
experience. And so this whole, whether it's Adamo or otherwise, this whole idea of bringing monetization into your game design from day one. And there are some publishers that are really and developers are really good at that. But I'd argue
Yeah.
that most of the game development world, especially on mobile free to play, it's oftentimes, especially smaller teams, they have a great idea for a game. They love that, this is their passion project, and monetization is a bit of a pain point because you kind of have to do it, not because you want to.
Yeah. I think that's all true. I think I will do a couple of caveats on that.
Yeah.
So when I'm teaching people game design or I'm trying to help teams understand monetization, what I'm trying to do is get them to think about, like you say, day one, what are the vectors that we can employ game economy elements?
Yeah.
But don't get too hung up on the forms of exchange.
Yeah.
So separate out the design vectors that allow us to have power ups and subsistence goods and
Yeah.
social items like cosmetics, strategy choices. Think about those vectors. Then, as we develop the design, we can explore how we grind those things. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important that you can grind almost everything. And then once we know what those things are, we already have an economy upon which we can assign what are our rewards and how are those
Yeah.
rewards meaningful, and why do people care about them. And if we know what those rewards are and why they're meaningful, then we can assign a value to them, and that value can be small, i.e. get a trial go of a new vehicle in a game, and after 3 goes I'm going to give you a 50% discount on buying it at that point in time, but you've got it as a reward and your rewarded ads, and now you can go buy it, and now you've got this other. So you're building a story, you're building an
Yes.
emotional connection with the items inside the game, which all based on the fact that you built the vectors in the first place.
I love that, Oscar.
And
That's a
then
great way to say, as a game designer, you don't need to understand, you don't have to be a monetization manager. You just need to
yeah
understand that there are spots within that. That's a great way to
yeah
look at that.
and then we can look at things like, is it an ad, is it an in-app purchase,
Yeah.
or is it part of a battle pass or a VIP subscription,
Yeah.
or is it just grind? And it's
Yeah.
okay. In fact, most of economy balancing is making sure you have something in there which keeps players grounded with a sense of purpose and progression that has to
Yes.
be grind.
Yes.
I mean, in
Yes.
the nicest possible way. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like
I mean,
I like
another way to
grind.
say
People don't
grind
like the
is
term
playing
grind.
the game, right? That's
Yeah,
another way to describe it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you basically monetize away playing the game, you've just killed your game.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Love it.
Cool. On that note, so we're gonna have to wrap up. We can and have
And
spent
Will,
hours
again,
chatting, and will continue to. But in the meantime, for the purposes of the folks who are listening to this podcast, how do people find you?
okay. My email address, I don't know if it'll appear here, is just kristen.rivers@adimo.com, which means you have to spell all those. Kristen, Kristan, and Adimo, Adinmo. LinkedIn, I'm sure you can, Oscar, you can find me through lots of
It'll be
different.
in the notes. Don't worry. All is good. And obviously, I'm Oscar. I'm at Athanasius. I'm equally hard to spell, but don't worry, it's in the notes. So thank you, Kristen. That's been great. We always love chatting about this stuff, and it's a topic that we care about. And hopefully, we've expressed that we don't have to be evil to want to make advertising a model. It can actually be a value for the player. And in fact, if it's not a value for the player, we haven't done our job properly. And there's so many different forms and types and ways to think about advertising and how it can benefit the experience overall. And that's what's really been interesting over the last 20 years or so of being in this space, seeing how that's evolved, at least for me anyway.
This has been an
So on that note,
amazing chat, Oscar. Thank you.
pleasure. So if you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and do all the other things. Or if you want to carry on talking about it, if you want to ask us questions, if you want to continue kind of pressing this discussion, if you want to hold us to account, please do come into the Discord and come and talk to us. And obviously, we are the Game Dev Local. So thank you very much, and goodbye.